Marco Thorne didn't just walk into a room. He invaded it. He was a man of shadows and cold steel. Usually, the sound of his boots on a marble floor made everyone run. But today, the man who ruled the city's underworld was frozen. He stood in his own hallway, unable to move. He saw the nanny. He saw his daughter. And for the first time in his life, the monster was afraid to breathe. What he saw in that library was something no amount of money could buy. It was a moment of pure magic in a house built on blood. Before we continue this incredible story of a man who thought he had no soul, please subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us tell these powerful stories every day. Also, we would love to know where you are watching from. Please leave a comment below and tell us your city or country. We love our global community. Now, let's go back to that silent, golden room. Marco Thorne was a name people whispered in the dark. He was the boss of the Thorne family. He was a man of few words and many secrets. His life was a war. Every day was a battle for power. Every night was a struggle for survival. He lived in a mansion that looked like a palace. It had high walls. It had armed guards. It had the finest furniture in the world. But it was not a home. It was a fortress. It was cold. It was empty. It was silent. Marco had a daughter named Bella. She was 7 years old. She had her father's dark hair and her mother's kind eyes. But her mother was gone. She had died years ago in a tragedy Marco never spoke about. Since that day, Bella had stopped laughing. She had stopped playing. She moved through the house like a ghost. She was a child lost in a world of giants. Marco loved her. He loved her more than his own life. But he didn't know how to show it. He thought that if he stayed away, she would be safe. He thought that if he didn't touch her, his darkness wouldn't rub off on her. So he provided for her. He bought her everything she could ever want. But he never gave her his time. He was a stranger in her life. Clara came into their lives 6 months ago. She was a quiet woman. She had a gentle face and eyes that saw too much. When Marco hired her, he didn't even look at her. He just saw a woman who could keep his daughter quiet. He saw someone who would stay out of the way. He told her the rules. Don't ask questions. Don't go into the basement. Keep the girl fed and clean. Clara nodded. She didn't seem scared of him. That was the first thing that made her different. Most people shook when Marco spoke. Clara just listened. She looked at him with a strange kind of pity. It bothered him. But he was too busy to think about it. He had a war to win. He had territory to protect. For months, the routine was the same. Marco left before dawn. He came home late at night. The house was always quiet. He assumed Bella was in her room. He assumed the nanny was doing her job. He never asked. He never checked. He just sat in his office and drank expensive whiskey. He looked at photos of his late wife and felt the weight of his sins. But Clara wasn't just doing a job. She was a woman with a secret of her own. She had been a teacher once. She had lost everything in a fire that took her family. She knew what it was like to be alone. She knew what it was like to live in a house that felt like a cage. When she first met Bella, she saw a reflection of herself. She saw a little girl who was drowning in silence. Clara didn't try to force Bella to talk. She didn't try to be her mother. Instead, she just stayed close. She brought a book with her every day. She would sit on the floor of the playroom. She would read out loud. At first, she read to herself. She read stories about brave knights and talking animals. She read about stars and the deep blue sea. Bella stayed in the corner. She watched Clara from a distance. A week went by. Then 2. On the 3rd week, Bella moved a few inches closer. On the 4th week, she sat on the edge of the rug. By the 2nd month, Bella was sitting right next to Clara. She didn't speak, but she listened. Her eyes grew bright. For the first time in years, the little girl was dreaming. Marco knew nothing of this. He was in the middle of a brutal conflict with a rival gang. There were shootouts in the street. There were threats against his life. He was stressed. He was angry. He was becoming more of a monster every day. His men feared him more than ever. He was a man on the edge of a cliff. On a rainy Tuesday, everything changed. Marco was supposed to be in a meeting across the city, but the meeting turned into an ambush. He had to fight his way out. He was covered in dirt. He had a cut on his forehead. He was in a foul mood. He wanted to go home and lock the doors. He wanted to be alone with his rage. He arrived at the mansion 4 hours early. The guards opened the gates in a hurry. They were surprised to see him. Marco didn't say a word. He stormed through the front door. He kicked off his boots. He wanted to head to his study. But as he passed the library, he heard a sound. It wasn't a sound he recognized. It was a voice. It was soft. It was steady. It was like a melody. Marco stopped. His hand went to the weapon at his side. He thought maybe an intruder had bypassed his security. He moved silently. He was a predator in his own house. He pushed the library doors open just a crack. The library was usually a dark place. It was filled with old books no one ever touched. But today it was full of light. Clara had opened the heavy curtains. The rain was hitting the windows, but inside, it felt warm. Clara was sitting on a pile of cushions on the floor. Bella was tucked under her arm. The little girl was leaning against Clara's chest. She looked small and safe. Clara was holding a large book. She was reading a poem. The stars are the streetlights of heaven. Clara read. Her voice was beautiful. It was full of life. They guide the dreamers home. They watch over the children when the world gets too loud. Marco watched them. He saw the way Clara stroked Bella's hair. He saw the way Bella looked up at Clara with pure love. It was a look he hadn't seen in 3 years. It was a look he thought was gone forever. Clara wasn't just reading. She was acting out the words. She made her voice high for the stars. She made it deep for the mountain. Bella actually giggled. It was a tiny sound. It was like a bell. Marco felt a sharp pain in his chest. That giggle was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard, and he had nothing to do with it. He realized in that moment how much he had missed. He had been so focused on his enemies that he had forgotten his own blood. He had hired a nanny to be a ghost. Instead, she had become a light. She was giving his daughter a childhood. She was giving her a soul. Marco felt like an intruder. He felt like he was looking at something he didn't deserve. He started to back away, but his boot creaked on the floor. Clara's head snapped up. She saw him. Her eyes widened. She didn't look scared. She looked disappointed. She saw the blood on his shirt. She saw the anger on his face. Bella saw him too. Her smile vanished. She stiffened. She moved away from Clara. She looked down at the floor. The magic was gone. The silence was back. "Mr. Thorne," Clara said. She stood up slowly. She kept one hand on Bella's shoulder. It was a protective gesture. She was shielding the girl from her own father. "You're early," Marco said. His voice sounded like gravel. He felt ashamed. "We were just reading," Clara said. She didn't apologize. She didn't move. "I see that," Marco replied. He looked at the book. It was old and worn. "What is that?" "It's a book of poems," Clara said. "My father gave it to me. Bella likes the ones about the moon." Marco looked at his daughter. "Is that true, Bella? Do you like the moon?" Bella didn't answer. She just nodded. She wouldn't look him in the eye. Marco felt the weight of his choices. He had built a world where his own child was afraid to speak to him. "Go to your room, Bella," Marco said. He tried to make his voice soft, but it came out like a command. Bella didn't hesitate. She ran out of the room. She didn't look back. Marco was left alone with Clara. The library felt huge. The rain was getting louder. "You're scaring her," Clara said. She didn't wait for him to speak. She wasn't an employee anymore. She was a woman who was tired of the darkness. "I'm her father," Marco snapped. "I provide for her. I keep her safe." "You keep her in a cage," Clara countered. "You provide her with gold, but she is starving for love. You come home covered in blood and wonder why she won't smile at you." Marco stepped closer. He was a foot taller than her. He was a man who had killed with his bare hands. "Watch your tongue, Clara. You are here to work, not to judge me." "Then fire me," Clara said. She stepped toward him. She didn't blink. "Fire me and let her go back to the silence. See how long she lasts before she disappears completely." Marco wanted to yell. He wanted to break something, but he looked into Clara's eyes and saw the truth. She was right. He was losing his daughter. He was winning the war, but he was losing his family. "I don't know how," Marco whispered. It was the first time he had been honest in years. Clara's face softened. "You start by putting the gun away. You start by sitting on the floor. You start by listening to the stories." Marco didn't fire her. That night, He sat in his office and didn't touch the whiskey. He thought about the poem. He thought about the stars. The next day, Marco did something crazy. He stayed home. His men were confused. His enemies were confused. But Marco didn't care. He sat at the dining table. He waited for breakfast. When Bella and Clara came down, they both froze. Marco was wearing a plain sweater. He didn't have his weapon on his hip. He looked almost like a normal man. "Good morning," Marco said. Bella looked at Clara. Clara gave her a little smile. "Good morning, Papa," Bella said. It was the first time she had used a word in months. Marco felt a lump in his throat. "I want to hear a story today," he said. Clara sat across from him. She watched him carefully. "The library is open, Mr. Thorne." For the next few weeks, the mansion began to change. Marco started coming home for dinner. He sat in the library. He didn't sit on the floor yet, but he sat in the big leather chair. He listened as Clara read. Sometimes he even asked questions. He learned that Bella liked the color blue. He learned that she wanted to see the ocean. He learned that she was brave. But the Thorne family lived in a world of violence. Change is dangerous in that world. Marco's enemies saw that he was getting soft. They saw that he was staying home. They thought he was weak. One night, the storm wasn't just outside. It was at the gate. Marco was in the library with Clara and Bella. They were reading a story about a dragon. Suddenly, the power went out. The house was plunged into darkness. Then, the sound of an explosion rocked the walls. Marco was on his feet in a second. His instincts were back. He pulled a hidden weapon from under the table. "Get to the safe room," Marco barked. "What's happening?" Clara asked. She grabbed Bella. "They're here," Marco said. "Go. Now." But the attackers were fast. They had breached the back entrance. The sound of gunfire echoed through the halls. Marco's guards were fighting, but they were outnumbered. "The hallway is blocked," Clara shouted. She had looked out the door. Marco looked around the library. There was no other way out. The library was a trap. "Under the desk," Marco said. He pushed the heavy oak desk toward the corner. "Both of you, get under there and don't make a sound." "Marco, what about you?" Clara asked. She was terrified, but she was holding Bella tight. "I'm going to do what I do best," Marco said. He looked at his daughter. "I'll be right here, Bella. No one is getting past me." The library doors burst open. 3 men in masks stepped in. They had rifles. They looked like professional killers. Marco didn't wait. He moved like a shadow. He was a blur of motion. He didn't care about his own life. He only cared about the 2 people hiding under the desk. He took down the first man before he could even raise his gun. The room was filled with the smell of smoke and the sound of shouting. Marco fought like a demon. He was hit in the shoulder. He was bleeding from a cut on his arm, but he didn't stop. He was the king of this fortress, and he was defending his throne. He took out the second man. The third man lunged for the desk. "No," Marco screamed. He tackled the man, slamming him into a bookshelf. Thousands of books came crashing down. The man was buried under the weight of the stories Clara had been reading. Marco stood over him, his chest heaving. He was covered in blood. He was exhausted, but he was standing. The house went quiet. The sirens were in the distance. His men had cleared the rest of the building. Marco turned toward the desk. He was afraid of what he would see. He was afraid that Bella would be terrified of him. He looked like the monster she had always feared. "Clara?" "Bella," he whispered. They crawled out from under the desk. Clara was covered in dust. Bella was crying. Marco stayed where he was. He didn't want to get close to them with the blood on his hands. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said. "I'm sorry this is my life." Bella didn't run away. She didn't look at the floor. She ran to her father. She threw her arms around his legs. She sobbed into his jeans. "You saved us," she cried. "Papa, you saved us." Marco fell to his knees. He didn't care about the pain in his shoulder. He pulled his daughter into his arms. He held her so tight, he could feel her heart beating against his. He looked up at Clara. Clara was standing there, watching them. She was shaking, but she was alive. She looked at Marco, and for the first time, there was no pity in her eyes. There was respect. "You did good, Marco," she said. That night was the end of the old Marco Thorne. He realized that he couldn't live 2 lives. He couldn't be a monster and a father at the same time. He had to choose. He spent the next few months making a massive change. He made peace with his rivals. He sold off his illegal businesses. He used his power to build something good. He started a foundation for children. He turned his mansion into a place of light. It wasn't easy. There were people who wanted him dead. There were people who didn't believe he could change. But every time he felt like giving up, he walked into the library. He would see Clara and Bella. They would be sitting on the floor. And now there was a third cushion. Marco would sit with them. He would take the book from Clara's hand. He would read the poems. His voice was rough, but it was full of love. The city still talked about Marco Thorne, but they didn't talk about the blood anymore. They talked about the man who was always seen at the park with his daughter. They talked about the woman who was always by his side. Clara was no longer just a nanny. She was the woman who had saved a family. She had taught a monster how to be a man, and she had taught a little girl how to dream again. One evening, a year later, the house was full of music. It was Bella's birthday. There were no guards in the hallway. There were no guns in the safes. There were only friends and laughter. Marco stood on the balcony, looking out at the city. He felt a hand on his arm. It was Clara. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "I was thinking about that Tuesday," Marco said. "I was thinking about the poem about the stars." Clara smiled. "They guided you home, Marco." "No," Marco said. He looked at her. He looked at the woman who had changed his world. "You guided me home." They walked back inside. Bella was waiting for them. She had a book in her hand. It was a new story. A story about a family that lived in a house of books. A story about a father who was a hero. "Is it time?" Bella asked. Marco sat on the sofa. He pulled Bella onto his lap. Clara sat next to him. "It's time," Marco said. He opened the book. He began to read. His voice filled the room. It was a voice that was no longer a whisper in the dark. It was a voice that was proud. It was a voice that was home. And as the sun went down, the lights in the mansion stayed on. They were the brightest lights in the city. Because they weren't just lights. They were the stars that guide the dreamers home. The story of Thorne family is a reminder to us all. It doesn't matter who you were yesterday. It only matters who you choose to be today. No one is too lost to be found. No house is too cold to be warmed. We hope you found inspiration in this story of change and redemption. If you enjoyed this journey, please give us a thumbs up. Your likes help us reach more people who need to hear these messages. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. We have many more stories to share with you. Before you go, please share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had a moment that changed your life? We would love to hear your stories. Thank you for watching. We are so happy to have you as part of our community. Until next time, keep dreaming and keep reading. Take care and goodbye.